Hey folks, welcome back. Today we're taking a look at the latest common hero joining Vydar's ranks, Deflectatron. First, I want to give Renegade Game Studios a quick nod as they included a Deflectatron with the Embers of War figures they sent to my channel for review. However, because you can draft multiples of this figure into your army, I couldn't help but pick up a few more. I have a problem. Anywho, Deflectatron is a figure with a lot going on. I mean, just look at the thing. 3 robots conjoined into one is certainly not the visual direction I pictured when I heard the pre-release rumors, but if nothing else, it's creative. Something to note is that Deflectatron is a promo figure and subject to alternate availability. Your friendly local game store might have some, but if they don't, your best bet in acquiring one is through Renegade directly. Also note that all Deflectatrons come pre-painted. When we look at the army card included, well, there's no simple scape to be found here, that's for sure. Even though there are only 3 powers on this card, they're a dense 3 powers. A lot of folks have cited this as being the most complicated modern HeroScape card, and I don't necessarily disagree. With that being said though, I personally don't struggle much with understanding what's going on here. To me, even though the card is text heavy, it feels intuitive in design. I liken it to a Washia's card from the Battle Box. 4 powers on a card included in a starter set is kind of crazy, but they're powers that make sense and feed into each other. I feel the same way about Deflectatron, so I'll try to explain its abilities better as we go. The first thing to note is that Deflectatron does not start on the map with the rest of your army, instead being held in reserve off to the side. Orbital Deployment 3 allows you to drop a Deflectatron onto the battlefield at the start of a round. The 3 is there to remind you that it must be placed within 3 clear sight spaces of a friendly figure. I think this power is fairly self-explanatory. It resembles other drop powers we've seen in HeroScape before, but it does have a few key differences. For one thing, it doesn't require a dice roll or expend an order marker to activate. Other than the Deflectatron itself, no resource or opportunity cost is spent when using orbital deployment. This means that inserting a Deflectatron onto the battlefield can be a purely additive strategic move. Other than the limited timing window you must adhere to, you can keep a Deflectatron or 2 on tap throughout the game, and choose the opportune moment to drop them into battle. Just don't wait too long. You can only deploy 1 Deflectatron per round, and if you have no friendly figures left on the battlefield, you lose, regardless of how many Deflectatrons you have left in reserve. The other main difference orbital deployment has to other drop powers is that the Deflectatron does not have to be placed unengaged to other figures. This will become more relevant as we explore the other powers, but this gives you much more freedom of choice when deciding a landing zone. The second power on the card, Passive, is a negative ability, meaning that it takes something away from the figure rather than adding something new. In this case, Deflectatron cannot make leaving engagement attacks against enemy figures. That means that your opponent can move past your Deflectatrons without worry, so think twice before trying to tether your enemy with them. Negative abilities are pretty rare in HeroScape, but they can add a bit of flavor to an army card. Powers like Lumbering Bully or Water Weakness tell a story, and I think Passive does much the same. Attacking figures who run by just isn't in Deflectatron's programming. Finally, we come to the last power, Magnetic Deflector Shield. This is definitely the one that causes the most confusion, as it kind of reads like 3 powers rolled into one. Actually, it reminds me a lot of the ability text on a Yu-Gi-Oh card, come to think of it. So here we go. When a figure is adjacent to a Deflectatron, it cannot determine clear sight to other figures. That means that ranged attacks, or powers that require line of sight, are essentially switched off. Notably, this applies to both friendly and enemy figures. If that's the case though, why would anyone willingly stand next to a Deflectatron? Well, when such a figure defends against a non-adjacent attack, it changes one of the die results to a shield if possible. That more or less boils down to granting an automatic shield to whatever is rolled, but it won't boost your defense past its maximum. Because it's nearly an identical result in most scenarios, I wish they would have just gone the tough route with this power and simply said that you add 1 shield to whatever is rolled. Switching the die result is just as potent in most situations, but I think it's a little more complicated to internalize when the precedent set elsewhere in HeroScape uses a different method. I explored this in depth within my video on the Revenant Acolytes, but I think a +1 is just better for HeroScape than a reroll. Using the same logic here, I think an automatic shield is just better for HeroScape than changing a die result. It's the little things that add up. I'm a pretty firm believer that if a power can be simplified without affecting its essence, then it should be simplified. Like I said though, this ability basically equates to an automatic shield in addition to whatever is rolled in most situations. The only time the results are different is if you roll a shield on every die, and that doesn't happen often. A figure with 1 defense can expect to do so 33% of the time. A figure with 2 defense can expect to do so 11% of the time. A figure with 3 defense can expect to do so 4% of the time. A figure with 4 defense can expect to do so 1% of the time, and so on. The point is, in the vast majority of scenarios, an automatic shield would have been functionally identical and more in keeping with powers previously seen in the game. The choice the designers made here isn't wrong, but I personally think there was a better way to go about this. The final line of text on the card tells us that the magnetic deflector shield is negated when next to another figure with the same ability. At present, the only other figure with this power is Deflectatron, so what does this mean? Essentially, it's twofold. You can't double stack your Deflectatrons, but you can turn off your opponent's Deflectatrons with your own. Imagine a scenario where your opponent had deployed a Deflectatron, but at the beginning of the following round, you decide to pop one of your own next to theirs, essentially nullifying both until one is destroyed. Is it worth expending one of your Deflectatrons to negate an opponent's Deflectatron? I don't know. I think it depends on the matchup and situation you find yourself in. There's certainly an argument to be made for the efficacy of such a move, and I appreciate it being made an option here. So let's recap. Magnetic Deflector Shield removes an adjacent figure's ability to make ranged attacks or use powers that require line of sight. However, in return, it also helps defend figures against ranged attacks by changing one of the die results to a shield. Additionally, like 2 magnets with opposite charges, the magnetic shield is cancelled out if another Deflectatron gets too close. I think that's about as simple as I can make it. Like I said earlier, there's a lot going on here, but it makes intuitive sense to me. Essentially, figures that stand next to a Deflectatron are entering a bubble of protection that makes them tougher to hit at a distance, but obscures their own vision of the outside world. The applications of this ability are interesting to ponder. Yes, this would make the Krav Maga agents nigh unkillable at a distance, but it also removes their ability to fight back. Maybe dropping a Deflectatron into the start zone at the beginning of the game in order to protect your own agents until they're needed would make sense. From a defensive perspective, I think using Deflectatrons as shielded waypoints for melee figures making their way to the enemy might be the right call. Melee figures typically don't care about having their line of sight shut off, since you don't need line of sight to attack a figure you're engaged with. You know who does care about line of sight though? Cheerleaders that grant an aura effect. If your opponent allows you to get too close to their rail-in at the end of a round, you can pop down a Deflectatron right on top of them and shut off that effect. Then your opponent has to waste time either moving their aura figure or attempting to destroy your Deflectatron instead of attacking your other forces. Another tactic that Deflectatrons are fairly well suited for is area denial, especially in the mid-game after some development has occurred. If there's a particular hex that you're worried about your opponent exploiting at the start of a new round, just plop a Deflectatron there and ruin their day. Finally, we should probably quickly talk about the stat block on this card. In essence, it's largely irrelevant, as the bulk of the games you play with this figure will involve placing no order markers on this card. Deflectatron gets its value through its effects on other figures on the map, not through its own stats. At only 25 points, I think 4 defense and 1 life are probably the 2 most important ones to highlight here. The Deflectatron is fairly sturdy, but it's not invincible. Deploying them in defensive areas, such as on high ground, in shadow, or next to jungle cover will help keep them alive. 4 move is terrible for a melee figure, but 3 attack is nothing to scoff at. In the late stages of a close match, dropping a Deflectatron next to an enemy and using order marker 1 to try to get some value out of that attack stat might be the ticket you need to swing things in your favor. Anyways, that should just about cover my thoughts on the Deflectatron. What do you think of it? Hopefully you leave this video with a better understanding of the card, or else I haven't done my job here. I've been your host, RR Slugger, and until next time, happy scaping.